Welcome to the Joint Legislative Oversight and Sunset Committee meeting. My name is Senator Kyle Evans-Gay, and I'm chair of this committee for this year. I'd like to ask the committee members to introduce themselves, starting with our vice chair, Representative Dorsey Walker.
Good morning, Representative Sherry Dorsey Walker of the 3rd District, and I represent the west side of Wilmington.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Pettyjohn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Brian Pettyjohn, 19th District, Georgetown, Bridgeville, Long Neck.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Yerrick.
Good morning, Representative Lyndon Yerrick, serving the people in the 34th Representative District in the center of Kent County.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Griffith.
Good morning. I am Krista Griffith, and I represent the 12th District and Northern Newcastle County. Thanks.
Thank you. Senator Hansen.
Good morning. I'm Senator Stephanie Hansen. I represent the 10th District, which is Middletown, Bear, Glasgow, and part of Newark.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Spiegelman.
Representative Jeffrey Nathan Spiegelman, see, all of us have 3 names, representing Middletown to Marydale.
Thank you, Mr. Nathan Spiegelman. Representative Kendra Johnson.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Kendra Johnson. I represent the 5th District here in Newcastle County, which is a little bit of a lot of things. Newcastle, Newark, and Bear. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Representative. And last but certainly not least, Senator Pinckney.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. I am Senator Marie Pinckney from Delaware's 13th District, covering parts of Newark, Newcastle, and Bear as well.
Excellent, welcome. And we have Senator Bryant Richardson, who is also a member of our committee, who will be joining us shortly. And I would like to thank everyone, especially the members of the public and the interested parties this morning, for accommodating a rainy day 9 a.m. meeting. But you know, the work never stops here in the General Assembly. So thank you all for being here. If we can start with a review of our minutes from our March 11th, 2021 meeting. They'll be posted on the screen. I know they were also circulated to members of the committee prior. If there are no questions, comments about the minutes, I'd entertain a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the minutes.
Second.
Thank you, Senator Pettyjohn. Thank you, Representative Dorsey Walker. All those in favor of approving the minutes, please signify with your silence. If you oppose, please unmute and say nay. Okay, hearing none, the minutes are approved. Thank you. And we'll move into our single agenda item for today. We are going to hear from our analysts, their draft recommendations for the Health Resources Board. First, our staff's going to offer a short presentation and then the committee can have discussion. Here today with us are also staff from the HRB, and they're available if we have any questions. And as a reminder to our committee members and to anyone watching today, there is no public comment period for this agenda item. There was substantial public comment provided at a prior meeting, but the public is still welcome to submit any written comments to the Sunset email, which is just sunset@delaware.gov. Are there any questions from the committee before we get started? All right, I'll turn it over to Amanda. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you. Good morning. Just waiting on the screen. So this is going to be an overview of the findings and recommendations report. Mark, if you want to, yeah, there we go. Sorry. The recommendations contained in this report focus on the legislative changes for the Health Resources Board, and they're not final until discussed and adopted by the committee. The committee is free today to discuss, adopt, or rewrite recommendations. And if needed, the HRB is already on the March 25th agenda, which is next Thursday. The next slide. Before we get started, I just want to highlight a few acronyms that are heavily used throughout this. JLOSC is, of course, this committee. It stands for the Joint Legislative Oversight and Sunset Committee. HRB is the Delaware's Health Resources Board, which was established to provide cost-effective and effective use of healthcare resources and to ensure Delawareans have access to high quality and appropriate healthcare services. CPR is the Certificate of Public Review process, which is Delaware's form of a CON, which is a Certificate of Need law, which functions include providing a review of certain proposed new healthcare facilities, services, and major capital expenditures. The Hrmp is the Health Resources Management Plan, and that's actually in the board's regulations, and it's used to guide the board through the CPR process. The next slide just highlights some new report features. This is benefit to the committee and the public listening or tuning in. This report is following our new format, which is part of our overall streamlining process. We intend to use this format for the 2020 reviews. Just future reports will include a section covering the performance review. That wasn't included in this report because the performance review was covered in the draft report and final report from last year. And those are both available on the committee's website. For the public tuning in today, this report and public comments received will be posted on the committee's website after this meeting. And just please allow us at least one business day for this information to post. For those of you who are tuning in and would like to still submit public comments, as Senator Gay stated, please email them to sunset@delaware.gov. On this next slide, I just want to quickly note the objective of this review, and actually all of our standard sunset and oversight reviews follow this objective. The reviews look at these particular statutory criteria. It's just in the upcoming and the 2020 reviews, they won't include number 4 since the entities under discussion for review have never been reviewed by the committee. The next slide just briefly highlights the scope of this report, and all others are, the scope of this report, which covers an 8-year span from the conclusion of the last JLOC review in May 2012 through December of 2020. The next slide here, it just highlights the 9 staff findings that are included in the report at a glance. And I'm going to briefly go, yep, that's fine. I'm going to briefly just go through them because they relate closely to the recommendations that are in the report. So what you're looking at now is a map that we created with research, and this shows states with CON laws and board composition. Finding number 1 states that 34 states in the District of Columbia currently have CON laws, and in the 16 without, which are shown here on the map in gray, there's still heavy regulations and licensing processes in place to evaluate healthcare planning and resource development. The full report details examples of non-CON state requirements. And this map also touches on staff finding number 2. It shows that only 11 states, including Delaware in the light blue, rely on a decision-making board for CON application decisions. 22 states and the District of Columbia currently make CON decisions either without a board, shown in purple, or with an advisory one, which is in the dark blue. And New York State is unique. It's in green. It has a hybrid model. So the commissioner makes decisions with an advisory board support, and then some decisions are made by a decision-making board. The next slide is going to cover staff findings 2, 3, and 5. They're all related, so for time purposes, I put them all here on one slide. The main point here directly ties to staff recommendation 2, which I'll get to here at the end, in that HRB would function better as an advisory board. So like many boards in the state, this is a volunteer board. To move to advisory capacity would benefit the program by retaining the institutional knowledge, while at the same time reducing the conflicts of interest, workload, and number of meetings required for board members. A reduction in meetings would translate into cost savings. Outside of the pandemic, all meeting space had to be contracted out. So in 2019, the board spent a little over $7 grand on meeting space facility costs. And this was the second largest expenditure reported in their performance review questionnaire. To provide an additional thought on how this could work, states that use advisory boards often use them to conduct public hearings and to gain their professional perspective on the applications as part of the overall research process, which is conducted by staff. This is the 4th sunset and oversight review of this board, Health Resources Board. Throughout review history, quorum and conflict of interest issues have been prevalent, and these topics were covered in more detail under staff findings 3 and 5. Staff finding 3 provides additional details regarding the conflicts of interest among board members and how that negatively impacts the review process. Most notably, the last JLOC review in 2012, the committee adopted recommendation 9, and that required the board to develop a conflict of interest guidelines and provide members the opportunity to participate in a public integrity commission training session no less than once per year. To date, only 1 training session has occurred, and that was on February 28, 2013. And of the 12 board members that were present, only 2 remain appointed. Other than that, there was 1 advisory opinion meeting held on October 1st, 2015 at the request of 4 members. Only 2 remain serving. And based on information received and other fieldwork completed, there's no evidence of training for new board members or any ongoing training opportunities. The 7 board members who participated in our board member survey, it did express interest in more training opportunities. Finally, and finding 5, quorum and conflict of interest trends still continue. In 2019, 3 members attended 57% of the meetings. That's barely meeting the 50% statutory requirement. In 2020, there was 1 member who only attended 33% and 2 members attended 55% of the total meetings held. This board has made 30 decisions in the past 7 years, approving all but 2 applications reviewed. Meeting attendance was charted out in the report under staff finding 5, and that was done just to illustrate meeting trends, either canceled due to quorum issues or lack of board business. We do not know the reasons for the absences, just know that with 2 long-standing vacancies on the board, quorum issues can occur more frequently when members are unable to attend. And finally, under staff finding 5, it's recommended for board composition to be reviewed to consider reducing 15 members down to 5 or 7 and adding a health economist member. The health economist member was discussed at last year's public presentation meeting. Other states with CON boards have been observed to include such a member. And this is one of 6 items up for statutory revision consideration under staff recommendation number 3. So the next slide covers staff finding number 4. This chart shows how the CPR process works. In a nutshell, after receiving a complete application, the applicant represents to the board, and the board then asks for volunteers to serve on a 3-person subcommittee, which is known as a review committee. The process has unfortunately not went smoothly, and more often than not, the board has great difficulty in finding 3 volunteers out of 13 members. And although it shows some very recent signs of improvement due to board member comments regarding the lack of rotation between all the members, the process still has a cumbersome process of holding public meetings that are closed to public and applicant comments. If the review committee cannot answer a question, what I mean by that is when they can't answer a question, the applicant from the application materials in front of them, the board staff has to then email the applicant after the meeting to get that answer. And then another review committee meeting has to be scheduled for the review committee to continue discussion. This process has delayed applications. So the charts on the next slide provided in the report show that out of 30 applications decided by this board between 2014 and 2020, the average time between a completed application and board decision is 117 days. The statute's guideline is 90 days for the review timeframe, although there are some exceptions with 180 days as the maximum. There are 2 applications during this timeframe that have taken longer than 180 days. These charts here don't show which applications required public meetings or public hearings, and these are just provided as a general idea just to show review timeframes and staff and board workload. The next chart here, though, on the next slide, does look at the last 10 CPR applications decided by the board over the last 2 years, 2019 and 2020. And it shows that only 3 review committees were able to complete their work in 1 meeting. The next slide here is, did someone have a question?
No, I'm sorry. I was just trying to, my mute button went off. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries, no worries. And if anyone has a question, feel free to interrupt me. The next slide here is for staff finding number 6. This is just noting that 2 recommendations from the 2012 JLOC review were never fully implemented. Specifically, those are recommendations 6 and 8, which modified the statute regarding for-profit acquisitions and also required the board to conduct a comprehensive review of their statute and CPR program. The next slide we have for you is the finding number 7. This is stating that HRB lacks sufficient independent data to review applications. What I mean by that is many states I found maintain large databases of utilization statistics. And one technique used by states is to build that database involves requiring past CPR recipients to submit utilization reports. I also found in states that don't even have CON programs, some often actually require just applicants in the healthcare licensing process to provide utilization statistics. So this isn't uncommon. Like in this, with this board could work similar to how the current charity care reporting requirements work. Notably, such states as Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, and Hawaii, to name a few, they require submission of completed utilization forms, and the frequencies can vary, quarterly, annually, biannually reporting requirements. Currently, HRB only consistently maintains data on nursing home bed utilization annually. Nursing home beds only make up a small portion of overall applications that are received and reviewed by the board. This review did observe the board relying heavily on data supplied by applicants, and it's recommended for the board to explore methods to collect and maintain their own data, such as the suggestion to require annual utilization reports from past applicants or recipients of the CPR process. One memorable instance, just to provide an example of the lack of the independent data, is highlighted in the report with the most recent approved Bay Health application for a freestanding emergency department, and that operates under a new hybrid model that doesn't even operate on the East Coast, let alone Delaware. The hybrid model includes a walk-in care option under the familiar freestanding emergency department model. It's important to note that a similar application was submitted by BB for just a freestanding emergency room department without the hybrid model, and that was denied in August of 2019. The board deemed the application for BB, citing that emergency services were available in the proposed areas. Proposal was not in alignment with Delaware's initiative to lower healthcare costs. Less costly alternatives were available, and the proposal would negatively impact the existing healthcare system. Now, the review committee that reviewed Bay Health's application actually denied it with a vote of 2-1, and the full board voted against the decision and approved the application with little discussion. JLOC staff cannot find any public evidence that the review committee or HRB questioned this brand new hybrid emergency department model in any depth. And the overall model information was provided solely by the applicant and their partner, Intuitive Health. The next slide for finding 8. There's a section of Hrmp that should be codified, and there are additional areas of the HRB statute to improve, such as board structure, activity subject to review, fees, and quorum. What you're looking at right here is a chart of all applications with board decisions from 2014 to 2020, and they're color coded. So I had to split this in 2 to fit it on the screen. So you start with 2020 on the left, on the bottom of the right side is 2014. In reviewing the Hrmp, Section B covers acute care hospitals, and it states that Delaware's HRB placed a moratorium on new construction of acute care hospitals in 2019. So in reviewing all other state CON programs, these types of moratoriums are covered in state code. I'm not ready to change slides yet. And it's unclear why this board's moratorium was never presented to the legislature to be adopted into the board's code. Certainly, if this is something that's going to continue, I would suggest that it be adopted into code. It's also absent from the board's website. It was only found in a small section of the Hrmp. All areas of challenges that were listed in the initial performance review questionnaire completed by the board staff can be resolved by statutory revisions that are going to be provided in Staff Recommendation 3. And this recommendation includes revision considerations involving filing fees and the type of projects that even trigger the CPR process. Okay, so the next chart on the next slide is also split in half. This is additional research that was conducted, and it supports the statutory changes in terms of how other states operate, either with or without CON laws in place. Basically, your staff completed our own 50-state survey and reviewed the websites of each state and the District of Columbia, and used additional research sources such as the National Conference of State Legislatures and the National Academy for State Health Policy data to support research. For additional reference, in the first two columns, or well, second and third column rather, it just shows how each state stacked up in terms of health outcomes and system performance as reported by the United Health Foundation and the Commonwealth Fund. So the next slide is for finding 9. And this is the Hrmp, CPR application kit, and bylaws should be reviewed and revised. Charity care and CPR follow-up reporting activity schedules should be published on the board's website. As mentioned earlier, the Hrmp is the document that guides the review process, and it establishes common review standards. The last revision occurred on September 11th of 2017. This document includes 10 application process steps. Several items are missing from this section, such as the applicant's presentation to the board, the formation of subcommittees, which are known as review committees, and the review committee process. The Hrmp document should be user-friendly, and the public would benefit if the document was revised and the content was streamlined. The Hrmp also includes a section on charity care reporting, procedures and requirement, but it's unclear how diligent the board is in enforcing those requirements. There isn't a formal reporting schedule to be found on the website, and charity care reports, they appear randomly on agendas. The website should include a list of approved CPR applications and the required status reporting date. Also missing are sections that cover freestanding emergency departments, inpatient rehabilitation facilities, and acquisition of healthcare facilities. If you remember I think it was 2 slides back, those are 3 application areas that have been approved by the board over the past 7 years. A March 28, 2019 review committee specifically stated that the board's Hrmp did not have the mathematical criteria for addressing the need for freestanding emergency departments in the state. The CPR application kit was last revised on October 2nd, 2017. Since it closely relates to the Hrmp, it would make sense to revise both. The last revision date of the bylaws of the board were revised on October 13th, 2016. Just to quickly highlight, there's some inconsistencies between board operations and the bylaws, requiring quorum and member recusals. HRB listed recusals in the completed performance review questionnaire as a challenge, and this area should be readdressed in the bylaws. The bylaws also permit the board to create committees or task forces to assist them in conducting business, but absent from the bylaws is any information regarding the review committees and how they operate. This report actually recommends the discontinuation of the review committees. However, if they should continue, the details should be added in the bylaws. And currently, the only information on the review committees sits on the HRB website. It finally brings us to the staff recommendations for your consideration on the next slide. There are only 5 in total, with recommendation 4 has an option. Just quickly for the public attendees, I'll go through them real quick. Recommendation number 1 is the standard JLOC recommendation to continue or terminate. Staff recommends to continue HRB. Recommendation 2, which restructure to advisory capacity. Number 3 includes statute revisions in 6 areas, which would be board composition, quorum requirements, activities subject to review, which includes the previous unimplemented 2012 recommendation 6, procedures for review, review considerations and charity care. Recommendation 4 creates that utilization study and form requirements. There's an option 1 for 4, which is for the board to conduct a statewide health care facility utilization study on a biannual basis. And 5 is another standard recommendation for JLOSC, and that's to either release from review or hold over. Staff recommends to release from review upon enactment of legislation to restructure into advisory capacity, make technical corrections, and statute modifications listed under recommendations 2 and 3. Just lastly, it's important to note that any legislation approved by this committee and recommendations would be worked out between your committee staff. We'd work with DHSS and the HRB administrative staff and the Controller General's office. We would also engage stakeholders as necessary to draft the legislation. And that concludes my portion here. I'm happy to answer any questions. We also have some HRB staff here on hand as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And I was about to ask if folks could use the raised hand feature, but it looks like everyone's aware of that. So I'm not exactly sure whether it was Representative Griffith or Representative Dorsey Walker who said first, but we do have a vice chair in this room. So Representative Dorsey Walker, the floor is yours to start us off in the conversation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a quick question about, I think I heard Amanda say that this particular board spent $7,000 for meeting space. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And since we're in the virtual world.
No, that was for 2019. Sorry, Representative.
Okay. Oh, no problem. So since we're in the virtual world, I would imagine that $7,000 is null and void and they were able to go to either Microsoft Teams or Zoom?
Oh, absolutely. So the committee has been meeting remotely since the pandemic. So that figure, I mean, obviously the pandemic, we hope eventually we'll all be meeting in person eventually. So I highlighted the 2019 figure from before the pandemic when the board was meeting in meeting space. They didn't have meeting space to use of their own, so they would have to contract out and pay facilities to use the space. So that's where that figure comes from, was 2019.
Okay, and I have one more question around that particular figure. Since they are dealing with the healthcare system, there wasn't a healthcare system that had a meeting space or a room where they could just meet without having to pay that $7,000. That's a very large number for meeting space.
Yeah, I honestly, just because of the history of the board and all the previous reviews, meeting in a hospital facility like that wouldn't help the conflict of interest level. So since it's a state board, it would make sense to use state supported facilities or approved facilities that are commonly used.
And so this is a state supported committee that had to spend $7,000 with all the facilities that are owned by the state.
Exactly. It's usually done by an IV internally with the state when you go to contract out to use space. So, you know, whatever the committee decides with these recommendations, certainly something that could be considered to suggest to the board is, you know, trying to help them find space that's not, they don't have to pay for. I know Del Tech, you have to pay for the meeting space from my previous state employment.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Griffith.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Amanda, for the very detailed, thorough report. I have a question, but before I ask my question, I'm going to make a few statements. There were a lot of things that I was struck by this report. And again, I didn't have the opportunity to participate in the public comment, but certainly I have read the documents that have come in from the public that we've been provided, as well as your detailed report. One is, and anecdotally, this was told to me outside of this this group by some advocates, that there was at one point a pediatric surgeon who works on children who need heart repairs to save their lives. And he's just one example, I'm sure, of many who has cleared his schedule for the day so that he wasn't seeing children who needed desperate heart surgeries, probably including transplants, et cetera, life-saving surgeries, to go to a meeting to get approval for a cath lab at Nemours, I believe. So he cleared his schedule, told those families that, you know, that he couldn't see them that day, came to the HRB only to be told they didn't have enough members, and that was basically a waste of a day, a waste of time. I was struck by the fact that over the years, despite being recommended to have the Integrity Commission give some reports on conflict of interest, that opportunity was never taken advantage of. I was struck by the length, the inordinate amount of time that it takes to get these recommendations done. And I was also struck by the lack of, frankly, detailed minutes on these very important applications and sort of what's going on with these discussions. I think you noted one in your report concerning an emergency room in Sussex County. So my question is this: on the advisory, if we follow recommendation number 2, which is moving this to an advisory capacity, tell me how that would solve some of those issues in terms of quorum, conflict of interest, expediency and efficiency, and as well as, you know, just sort of that independent review. If you could address some of that to say, like, how does that recommendation number 2 not solve, but assist with this, with the problems that do certainly exist?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Representative. So the application, just quickly, that you noted was for Nemours AI DuPont Hospital for cardiac cath lab. That was eventually approved. It did take 2 review committees to go through that process. So in the staff recommendation 2, to change this to advisory capacity, what that would mean is that the structure would change, and it would change significantly to where it would be more of the staff doing the reporting, doing the research, which is required to adequately and thoroughly review these CON applications. That's what you see throughout the states that use either use an advisory board or no board at all, and they're just deciding the applications in-house in the agency. So you usually have a commissioner or an agency director that is rendering the final decisions to the applicants. But an advisory board would just be supportive in that process. And what's commonly observed is that the staff receives the application, they go through everything, they do all the applicable research to it, they complete a report. And then if they have an advisory committee, they would submit that report to the committee. And they usually use that advisory committee to hold their public hearings. So to get public comments on record, to have a presentation, really just to facilitate that whole public process. And then after hearing all that testimony, then the advisory board would then discuss, you know, their professional input and opinions. All of that would then be, you know, delivered to the agency that's tasked for reviewing these applications. And then the commissioner or the director, in turn, with all the research and then all that information from the public meeting, including the advice of the advisory committee, would then make the ultimate decision. And that, I think, creates a more structured process that really heavily focuses on the research element, which has been absent here. And that's no fault of the board or the agency that's currently handling it. It's just, I don't believe the resources have been available or put in place by the state to hold up this process. So that's why, just looking at all the states in the 50-state review that we completed, just seeing that the large amount of them are either making them in-house or with just an advisory board, just says to me that it makes sense to make that a more streamlined process. and more transparent process. And as noted, you know, the constant theme with this board in particular throughout this review and the previous three has been conflict of interest. So if the board is no longer making the decisions and they're advising on it, then that should eliminate some of that conflict of interest. Also decreasing the board membership to 5 or 7 members as opposed to what it currently is at 15, that also is going to help with quorum. And since it's advisory and they're not really rendering a decision, and Holly can correct me or step in if I'm wrong, but since they're just conducting a public hearing, I don't necessarily think that quorum would even be necessary to hold the public hearing just to gain the testimony. And typically at those hearings, the board staff and the commissioner or director or whatever you would like to call them, they're all present at that meeting as well. So I think that that solves a lot of areas that were identified not only in this review, but previous ones.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful.
Thank you. And Senator Pettyjohn, you're next in line, but Senator Pinckney's informed me she just has a quick follow-up on that same topic. Would you be okay if we move that direction? Thank you so much, Senator Pinckney.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Amanda, thank you so much for all that really great explanation. Just a follow-up question to that. How would moving to the advisory board impact costs?
Excuse me, Madam Chair, are you able to ask Senator Pinckney if she can enhance her volume? We're unable to hear her. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I am, thank
Sorry
you.
for the interruption.
I'm sorry, it's a constant issue with my computer. Is this better?
That's better. Yeah, thank you.
Again, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Amanda. That was a really great answer to a very similar question that I had. I'm just curious how this will, how if we moved to an advisory board, how would that impact the costs of the work that gets done by the HRB?
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator. So it would dramatically decrease the amount of meetings for starters. With the current process, several meetings have to take place throughout this entire process of reviewing an application. You know, remembering back to the slide in the chart with the, you know, the decided CPR applications and review committee meetings, you know, I noted that only in the past 2 years, only 3 of them were completed in one meeting. So all of these review committee meetings require meetings, and they were outside of the pandemic. Like right now, they're able to do it in a virtual format. But prior to the pandemic and eventually sometime after, they moved back to, you know, public meeting space to hold an in-person meeting. So if you move to advisory capacity, you could, what I didn't mention is one important thing is to move all these reviews, you can move them onto a schedule. When you go through all the states that use a CON process, most of them have schedules posted on these are the deadlines to submit, and this is what you can expect from the board. This is the timeline it'll take to review. Here's when we're going to hold hearings. You can lay all that out on the board's website. And then instead of having, you know, 3 meetings and a public hearing for an application, you could go to 1 public meeting for numerous applications just for the public hearing component to receive public comment, also testimony from the board members on their professional perspective. So it would drastically reduce the meeting costs and just by number of meetings that needed to be held.
Thank you so much, Senator. Senator Pettyjohn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the report. As I told you yesterday, Amanda, this is probably one of the most comprehensive reports I've seen within Sunset. You know, and I was on Sunset for a number of years before this term. So I want to thank you and the entire staff for this report. One of the things that has really concerned me over the last couple of years is how the Sussex applications were handled, specifically the freestanding emergency rooms that both BB and Bay Health submitted. That being kind of my neck of the woods here, I was really following those two very closely. And the way that they were decided, I mean, the BB was denied in part, I believe you said, because of the location it may, you know, adversely impact. But the Bay Health one was approved, as you said, with some changes and very little input and discussion as to those changes and the reasons for those changes. but it's closer to other facilities that the Georgetown one was. So there's a lot of things that are discussed and decided, and without that discussion by the board, it's very nonsensical. And it raises questions as to the reasons, the underlying reasons why these were either denied or approved. We have a issue here in Central Sussex, especially right here in the heart of Sussex in Georgetown, where if you want to go over, especially in the summertime, if you want to head over to BB, well, you're having to deal with a whole lot of traffic. If you've got to go up to Milford, now that it's over on the other side of Milford, you've got traffic to deal with there. Nanacoke or Tidal Health over in Seaford, same problem depending on the time of day. When minutes count in terms of getting a patient to critical care, the decision to deny something in the center of the county is something that really struck a lot of people as not in the best interest of care for the residents here of Central Sussex County. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say let's disband this, but at the same time, I think there are some serious structural problems with the way decisions are done, with the way hearings are done, with this board. And I looking at your recommendations, I like the way that the recommendation is to restructure it from a decision making to an advisory. At the same time, I want to make sure that the entire process, all the discussions are done on the record with this advisory committee, that there is no backroom discussions that are taking place with applicants and the members of this, so that the rationale for making these decisions that at this point, again, we find nonsensical, the rationale can be something that the public and us as policymakers and lawmakers in the state have confidence in.
Thank you, Senator. And if I may just follow up for the benefit of folks who are watching or didn't have the chance to read the report like we did, just two things. One is Senator Pettyjohn hits on something kind of key to our mission here, which is we can't go back and fix or change different things that we may have wanted to go a different way. But what we can do is look at how the operations are creating the opportunities for misses and try and fix those. So I do appreciate, and for members of the public, this review is not about any particular decision of the HRB. It is more about the operational work. And I appreciate that this committee has been focused on that. The other thing too, I'll say is that, just so that it's here on the record, Amanda, you've talked about the benefits of going to an advisory board. You shared with your map that there aren't just two ways that states handle this. Can you talk a little bit about why you're recommending an advisory board instead of, as Senator Pettyjohn mentioned, perhaps going even further, why you're recommending continuation and change rather than elimination?
Sure, thank you. And thank you so much, Senator Pettyjohn, for your comments. And Senator Gay, yes, this particular instance was just highlighted in the report and in my presentation, just as one example of how this board and the decisions are made are impacted by lack of research. So they're relying on the applicant's presentation and the applicant's research, and there's no ability to take that and provide their own input and research to kind of counter that, to see, to really evaluate the application. So when I was looking at all the states and how they either handle not having a CON process in place or having one, what I found was, even with the states that don't have a CON process, they still have heavy regulation. So even though they might not be going through this additional process, they're still going through a licensing process to open up a healthcare facility. And like I had mentioned, some states even require, utilization reporting requirements to really help maintain data, so the state is understanding of what's going on, what's been permitted and licensed in the state. And really, when more applications come in, what that looks like, what the impact is. It's really just like an internal building of data, which helps them. So in making the recommendation on either to continue or terminate, just based on, just all the information from the past reviews, all the research conducted in this, and just knowing, like, I've lived in Delaware my whole life minus 5 years. My father is military. So just being in a small state, I feel that the process is important. It does provide, needed, review of these applications, especially when it's a small state and there's, it's small infrastructure. So you want to make sure that something's not getting added that's going to increase healthcare costs. In the chart I did with the 50-state survey, currently Delaware sits at 35 for overall health outcomes rank, and Delaware sits as 24 for overall rank on the 2020 scorecard, which is for on the state health systems performance chart. So Delaware is not even in the top 10 on either one of those. So, and as it's been noted in the Healthcare Commission's work with this board, the whole purpose of having Health Resources Board, excuse me, is to help keep costs low in the state for healthcare and to improve health outcomes for all Delawareans. So I think it's an important process to have. It's just, as highlighted, the process really needs some changes, some structure changes, and just looking at all the other states, just moving it to advisory capacity just looks like, to me, it would solve a lot of issues that have already been established as being prevalent, such as your quorum, your conflicts of interest, the meeting space. All of these issues could be resolved by moving that capacity to advisory and really creating a department and administrative staff to adequately and thoroughly research the applications.
Thank you very much. Senator Hansen was next up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say to our JLOSC staff, wow, what a great report, and really analysis of the information, to know what to look for, to decide what to look for, to be right on target with that, and then to find it, do the analysis and come up with recommendations. This has been, this is a great piece of investigative research, and thank you very much for bringing this to our attention. I had a question that sort of worked kind of in tandem with the question from Senator Pinckney, and that looks at, if we switch from an advisory board over to having research done and more staff heavy, do we know how much in staff cost that might be? Will we need to hire additional staff in order to do work which is necessary, but just to kind of get an idea, what are we looking at? What's the size of that work?
Sure, thank you, Senator Hansen. Thanks for your comments. So in the reports, and on it was like back on slide 12, it was the staff finding floor charts. I provided that information just to show how many applications actually come into this board. So how much work is kind of at stake here. Just to real quick recap, the first stage in the entire process is called a notice of intent. So that has to be submitted by the applicant at least 30 days before they submit an application. So in 2020, the board only received 4 of those. And one was deemed that it was an exempt request, so it didn't move forward into the process. And then when you look at CPR applications received for 2020, that was 3. And then the board determined complete was 4 applications. 1 was carryover from 2019. The most the board has ever received was, 2019, the board received 14 notice of intents. Then they only received 9 completed applications out of that 14, and then 9 applications were determined as complete. So that just provides a little, snapshot of what work the board is currently working with. In terms of staffing, currently there's 1 administrative assistant or administrative specialist rather that supports the board. I believe that, moving the board to an advisory capacity, it it's going to be a huge structure change. And I think it's important that our office works with DHSS and also the current HRB staff under the Delaware Healthcare Commission to really determine if it's a good fit to stay under the Healthcare Commission. The report did, talk briefly about the possibility of moving to another office. There's currently an Office of Healthcare Licensing. I'm abbreviating that because it's a much longer name than what I just said, but that office currently processes all the healthcare applications for facilities. And after this process is completed, the applicant then has to move to that office. So that's one example of an idea on where it can move, but certainly those would be conversations to have with DHSS. And then that would be information that would be brought back to the committee, because it would take obviously legislative change to move from decision-making to advisory. So in terms of staff, a lot of states that don't have high volume typically can handle it with one full-time staff person. And then they have a director that's usually a director of not just this piece, but many pieces in the agency. So a staff of at least one full-time dedicated to the research would, I think, be sufficient. Also to have moving to advisory, as I said, that would decrease the amount of meetings you would need. So that would free up money in their budget, because in 2019, I mentioned they spent a little over $7,000. The largest line item expenditure in 2019 was for their outside research. They contract out for the nursing home bed utilization statistics. So by decreasing the amount spent in meeting space, you could move those funds over to spending money on outside research if it was needed to support the staff member that's charged with researching and vetting these applications.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Yerrick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Harper, something will come up. I'd too like to thank Amanda and the entire team for this report. Very, very comprehensive, brings out a lot of great ideas. That being said, I'm not completely sold on the idea of not terminating the board. It's kind of like deja vu all over again. I can remember my comments 12 months ago. And what has changed in the last 12 months? Oh, we've been in a pandemic. Can you imagine having a process where you're part of an industry, pick any industry, and you have the ability to perhaps limit, deter, reduce potential competitors in that industry? Now, we do have some of those examples, for example, with our alcohol industry that is very restrictive, with regard to distance and size. That's in code, that's in law. But could you imagine if we would have had a shortage of acute care beds during the last 12 months or the next 12 months or next 12 years, or long-term care facilities, which we just had a report on last month? We decided that we, a three-person board, we're going to deter XYZ facility, a $20 million investment, a $50 million investment that they had to go raise the capital, acquire those funds through donors, that we were going to tell them, no, you can't. And I know it's been a long time since I earned my economics degree, but I can't remember of any scenario where those two lines meet, supply and demand and price and quantity, where you ever increase the quantity of a product or service and the price goes up. We're not advocating for, semi-licensed or approved doctors or nurses to come into these facilities. They still have to meet the same rules and regulations, you're right, through an advisory board. But to deter more competition, that again, I'm part of the industry that I can say that I want to reduce the number of competitors coming into my backyard. I'd like to have that scenario. And the fact of the matter is, and there are some that if we look at Newcastle County, there is one predominant supplier of this product and service, Christiana Care, with I think approximately 70% market share. How does that affect pricing and service if you had any product or service or industry where you had 70% market share? Now, they do great work, don't get me wrong, world-class healthcare facility. But my concern still remains in regard to the review process of having certain entities being able to say yay or nay to potential competitors coming in, competitors who are going to invest and take the risk of their own capital and resources why shouldn't they have that right? I mean, they do their due diligence, they do their homework. They're not casually throwing around millions of dollars to lose money. We should be welcoming as much competition in resource, acute care, emergency rooms, long-term care facilities, not deterring it. So I look forward to continuing this dialogue and debate about this process that I really, really appreciate the work that the team has put in. There definitely needs to be improvements in the process. And yes, that certificate need process, I think there needs to be significant time still put on that. Again, I'll leave you with that where, again, if you were in any industry and you had the ability to keep out potential competitors, who's working on whose behalf here? You know, as Delawareans that we're elected to serve, and I don't know how this is in the best interest of Delawareans in trying to provide the most affordable, high quality healthcare, where you can actually deter competition from coming in and providing more products and services. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Representative Yerrick. And unlike many of us, you were here, able to hear the hearing before, and so your comments are very informative. And I think Amanda had raised her hand perhaps to share more with respect to the recommendation.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Representative Yerrick, for your comments. I just wanted to point out that, the recommendation to restructure this into an advisory capacity, it really, in a sense, is a compromise. It's, as Senator Pettyjohn said, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Also just keeping the process, but making it more transparent, putting the research into and having a public process that's eliminating those conflicts of interest that sounds like from your testimony or what you're just saying is that the problem that has been occurring throughout, all the past reviews, this current review, is that public perception and the conflict of interest where you have a volunteer board reviewing these applications submitted by applicants that are, putting up their own capital for these healthcare facilities to open. Also important to note that in the 50 state survey chart, I highlighted the capital expenditure threshold amount that actually triggers a review. So that can help kind of give an idea of where all the states fall in this process. There's also information I have following that chart on a couple pages on the report that kind of just highlights some differences throughout the states and what they actually review. In the report, it's noted that a lot of states may have a CON process, but it's very limited in capacity. And that's one of the items under recommendation 3, the statute revisions. The third bullet is activity subject to review. And I absolutely think that looking at the current activities that are under review at this board are important to look at as part of this whole restructure process, because there's likely activities that are being reviewed that shouldn't be reviewed. Noted earlier by Representative Griffiths, the cath lab for the AI DuPont. Is that something that needs to be reviewed, that needs to go through this whole process when, there's other processes in place as well as oversight? So those are all things that we would be discussing between your staff here and DHSS, the Health Resources Board, and then involving stakeholders where necessary, just as in the process of developing this legislation for change.
Thank you, Amanda, and thank you again, Representative Yerrick. Senator Pinckney.
Good morning again, and thank you again, Madam Chair. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Amanda, again, thank you. Just like I will repeat what everyone else said, thank you again for such an amazingly detailed report. I know it was good and juicy and detailed because when I read it the first time, I was up until 2 o'clock in the morning, just kind of flipping pages and in shock. And there are not many reports that can make me do that. I tend to do it with books. So thank you. I have a couple of questions, actually. I think they may be more appropriate for the members of the HRB. I do have one, Amanda, that you may be able to answer, so I'm going to ask that first, and then if you think it's better for HRB, I'll refer it to them, if that's okay. My first question is, when I was reading this, there are multiple parts of the review that point to an important part of the work that the HRB does being ensuring access to care for lower income communities and underserved communities. I was curious if there was any reason why they don't review organization request to decrease beds. I saw that they review those for the request of increasing, but common problems for lower income communities and rural communities is lack of access to care. So is there any reason why they don't review when facilities desire to decrease beds, or is that just maybe something that doesn't happen frequently enough?
Thank you, Senator. So with the decrease of beds, I found maybe just off of memory, I think one or two examples come to mind, and it's really relating to the shift in beds from one county to another. So obviously this is a larger state than Delaware with our three counties, but usually historically, the CON process was set up not to look at the decrease in beds, but it was the increase in beds. It was anything increasing capacity into the healthcare network, which in turn, the theory is if you increase, you also run the risk of increasing cost. So the decrease is not looked at. The components that the board uses to review these applications, there's the Hrmp and also the statutory criteria, which is, then in turn put in that document. There are 7 pieces of criteria used to review these applications. And one of them is the consideration for charity care and also, the low income section concerns and considerations. So those are questions that the applicant answers to kind of explain what they do as far as outreach, and also a hot conversation now in the state is primary care. So that's a lot of the discussion you'll hear in this application processes is what they do with charity care, what they do with primary care. So I hope that answers your question. You mentioned you had another one.
Yeah, thank you. The remaining questions that I have may be more appropriate for the HRB members, and so I don't know if we can bring them on or how you'd like me to move forward with that.
Absolutely. Let's have anyone who's representing the HRB today. If you feel free to go off video, if you'd like to just go audio, that's fine. But Senator Pinckney, go ahead and maybe provide your question, and we'll see if someone can raise their hand, and we'll get an answer for you.
Sure. I have multiple, but I'm gonna try to ask them in a way that doesn't take all the time.
Sounds good.
My first question is I would kind of honestly just like to hear from members of the HRB on how they feel about moving to an advisory board versus maybe decreasing member size and trying to their capacity to make all of the very necessary changes that we have seen have not necessarily been implemented or followed up well from previous review efforts. So I'm curious on your take as the members of the board on I guess your preference versus the way to be most effective at the work that you're doing.
And Amanda, do you have someone here from HRB? Is that our telephone joiner today? Oh, thank you. Elizabeth Massa is here. Is that correct? Okay, thank you, Ms. Massa. And just for your benefit, because I know Senator Pinckney's still a little quiet, she was asking your opinion on the recommendations and maybe some insight on some of the missed opportunities to meet the recommendations prior. I can't hear you, Ms. Massa.
Oh, here. I didn't know if I could unmute.
There you go.
Good morning. Thank you for letting me join. Yes, great question, Senator. We are very supportive of professionalizing this board. We do recognize that there are issues with quorum, recusals, attendance. The board is quite large, so that has always been a challenge to get enough members just to attend these meetings. They are voluntary. So we have, when we met in person, this has been a constant struggle. It has been a bit better to do these remote, and maybe that's something that could be explored. we have been more successful achieving quorum through the virtual platforms. But yes, we definitely, additional staff support, healthcare analysts, to do some research either in-house or contracting with additional vendors. It was mentioned, we do have an epidemiologist that we work with for nursing home bed utilization reports. But if we could be more supportive and do some more research on these applications, that would be a huge improvement and give additional resources to our board members to make more educated and informed decisions and have more information available. We do think that would be very helpful. But yes, I mean, the things that were called out in this report, we have recognized as challenges and struggles, and there is a need for revisions as well.
Sorry, Ms. Hrmp, Ms. Massip, just before we continue, can you just state your name and your position for the record?
Oh, sure. We should have done that. Elizabeth Massa. I am the Executive Director of the Delaware Healthcare Commission, and also on the phone or on this meeting platform as well is we were within the Secretary's office at DHSS. And so we do report to the Office of the Secretary. And so I have on the line with me as well, Stephen Costantino, who's the Director of Healthcare Reform. And then our program manager, Latoya Wright with Healthcare Commission. She is the staff member that has been tasked with supporting the Healthcare Commission's HRB board. And she does do other responsibilities as well within the commission. This is not her only responsibility within the commission. And then we also have on the line our DAG as well, Annie Porto.
Thank you so much, Ms. Massa. Senator Pinckney.
I think I'll wrap up with just one other question. One of the things that I thought was particularly interesting where we could be making more money from this process. I mean, I looked at the report that you shared that said that some states, when they do this, charge all the way up to a maximum of $300,000 for the review of their applications. And for us, it looks like we have several items that were much more expensive than 10 million, and we did not. Our maximum charge for that is $10,000. So I'm curious, and I did see in the report that it looks like you guys have discussed filing fees in the past, but there's been no action towards increasing them. And I believe the report said it's been the same kind of cost filing fee for several years now. So I'm curious as to just kind of thought process behind like why we haven't really moved forward with that, and where you all are in the process of doing that, so that we can recuperate fees for the time and the labor that you guys do behind these reports.
Sure, that we have had some initial discussions here, but we haven't had anything in depth at this point in time. We would be supportive of looking at those fees and revisiting those as well. And I failed to mention too, we're very limited sometimes within what's spelled out in the Delaware Code. So we would be open to statute changes to help support some of these initiatives to make these changes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Pinckney. Representative Dorsey Walker.
Madam Chair, I think Amanda put her hand up. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much. Amanda, did you want to respond too?
Yeah, I was just going to add to the filing fee conversation. I just want to make sure it's noted that the filing fee structure that's currently in place for this board has been the same filing fees used since implementation in 1987. So in previous JLOC reviews, it's always mentioned to look at the filing fee structure to update. And, for whatever reason, maybe just the disconnect between, the legislative side and also the board side, the filing fee system has just the structure's never been updated, although it's been mentioned in this report and the 3 other reviews that it is something that should be addressed. To help aid in that discussion, the chart that was created for our 50-state survey, I did include the CON application fees for all the states that have them. So you can kind of see engaged throughout, the country what the filing fees are. The most expensive filing fee I found was $300,000, and that's through the District of Columbia. So each state bases their filing fees on several different things. So that is definitely something that I believe that should be looked at in the revisions and the legislative bills that, you know, will hopefully subsequently move forward in restructuring and providing support to this board and its process. The filing fees also, I just want to note that not included in this report, but just information that I found, a lot of states are struggling with the filing fees. So it's not just Delaware. There's a lot of states with outdated filing fees. So that's important to note with the chart where you may see really low fees. It's probably from a state that hasn't reviewed them since the 80s as well. Thanks.
Thank you for that additional information. Representative Dorsey Walker, thank you for your patience, and please, the floor is yours.
Oh, no problem, Madam Chair. Thank you. Again, I would like to echo the comments of my colleagues in thanking Amanda and the team for a job well done with such a thorough report. In listening to Representative Hrmp, Representative Griffith, Senator Pettyjohn, and Senator Pinckney, it sounds like that we need to potentially look at the CON process as well. So just kind of wanted to go on the record about that. And I have been receiving, ironically, emails from those in the community who are concerned about the CON process. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Representative. Representative Spiegelman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This ends up being one of those times when we actually have a lot of options ahead of us, and I want to make sure that we are not potentially plowing forward like a bull in a china shop here, as we have had organizations before us that have had multiple options on the table. The recommendation number one is to sunset the committee or not. And even if we choose not to sunset them, this committee is going to look dramatically different from what I'm understanding from the other representatives and senators who have spoken before me. This committee is going to look dramatically different. I think it will be very, very important before we even take a look at recommendation number one, that we have Mark and Amanda take a look at where the responsibilities of this organization will go within the government if we do disband them. Do they go to the Department of Health? Do they go to the Healthcare Commission? Do they go to DMA? Where do they go? How do other states that do not have these boards, where does the responsibility for this lie? Either as an advisory board, who are they advising? What are their capacities? If they're not an advisory board and they actually are a bottleneck, what capacity are they going to have? I think it's very important that along with the recommendations that were made, that this committee have options in front of it in order to take a look at, hey, if we're going to disband this organization, which it sounds like it's certainly a discussion to be had. What is that going to look like? Are we disbanding and then letting it go and the chips fall where they may? Are we putting them under the Healthcare Commission? What does the Healthcare Commission have to say about that? Are we dropping all the responsibilities into DHSS? What does DHSS have to say about that? I want to be careful that as we go through these recommendations, if we do disband them or not, that the organizations that will be affected have a chance to weigh in on what that will potentially mean for them and the general public.
Thank you, Representative. And I note that Amanda has her hand up to perhaps provide more insight there.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Representative Spiegelman, for your comments. To start, just for perspective on the research and what all the other states, have been observed in doing, I can tell you that processes similar to this, or even states that don't have a CON process at all, the healthcare facility applications, they're all dealt with in a DHSS type agency within the state. And usually they fall under an Office of Healthcare Licensure or Healthcare Oversight. So the placement of HRB currently right now is consistent with how other states place it. There are other places, as mentioned, within our own state that, could be a home for this. That's something that, as you mentioned, DHSS is on the call, so maybe they want to offer opinion now. If not, that is certainly something that we would discuss offline. The restructure to advisory capacity would help make this process run a whole lot smoother. And if the committee decided to adopt recommendation 2 to move to advisory, you could adopt that, and in the legislation, you could write in a sunset provision to trigger another review on the process to kind of check up on it. So you're not just, adopting a recommendation and forgetting about it. There would be a chance to review it. Also, you could adopt a recommendation and ask for an update on a certain date, whether that's a year from now or 2 years or whatever this committee decided. So there's tools available for this committee to adopt a recommendation and then check up on it later. It's not just adopting it and forgetting about it and hoping for the best. And really writing these recommendations, they were written and with it in mind to pass legislation that would help support the agency, but also not forget about it and give it the actual support that it needs to fulfill the mission that it's tasked to do.
Certainly,
so I just wanted to kind of add that.
And Representative Spiegelman, if I could real quick, I know we do have DHSS on the line, and I think that information, your request, to understand their point of view is helpful. I would ask, and because, I don't see a face, but I do see a name, if DHS could potentially provide via written letter to this committee, their opinion on, or their reactions to the recommendations prior to our March 25th meeting, at which point this committee is intending to take a vote on recommendations or modified recommendations.
Madam Chair, if I can, before we go to DHSS,
Sure.
Amanda, certainly I understand. In the past, however, when we have adopted hefty recommendations that fundamentally change the way an organization works, Holly has always gotten back to us requiring direction in how we want that legislation written. So in anticipating what will be Holly's request would be, if we're going to do advisory, if we're going to disband, in order to write that legislation, she's going to need to know what that looks like. And so we're going to need those options.
Oh, absolutely. That was part of writing this. And I've been speaking with the Health Resources Board staff and, DHSS to kind of, initially kind of gauge their feelings on this and, what their thoughts are on it. We do have Stephen on the meeting here that can provide some more insight in that capacity, but that absolutely is part of our process. Holly would never write a bill to restructure to advisory capacity without involving the stakeholders. So I just want to kind of make that clear. Thank you.
I'll open the floor if a member of DHS would like to comment. Otherwise, like I said, a written communication would also suffice prior to our March 25th meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. And I just want you to know, just to give you a little 2-second vignette on my long career.
Can I ask you real quick, Mr. Constantino, can you please just introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Stephen Constantino. I'm Director of Healthcare Reform for the Delaware Department of Health and Social Services.
Thank you.
And thank you for that. I was on the CON committee in Rhode Island for 3 years. I was a legislator in Rhode Island for 16 years. You didn't hear that. And I was secretary in Rhode Island and commissioner in Vermont, and totally understand the challenges of CON. And I think Amanda quite adequately said you're not dealing with any issues that other states are dealing with in terms of certificate of need processes. And I will say, I think from the DHSS, and we could get this in writing as well if necessary, Senator Gay, I think the key here is the professionalization of the process. That is critical wherever it ends up. You've got to have the kind of staff and consultants that can do the type of research analytics, because you're facing a applicant who has done deep research, and in order to have the give and take, on what they're presenting, you've got to have the other side of the story, or maybe aligned with the story. That kind of validates the decision and gives the committee the right type of information before them. So wherever it goes, I think professionalization of the staff is critically important. And it does give a level of transparency as well, because you're seeing, in a public meeting, that give and take that happens, rather than a one-sided version of an application or a philosophy of an application. So that's critical. Advisory component is also okay as long as it's professionalized. I don't think we have issues with that. I think you may want to look at, where it sits. Obviously, if it's advisory to the secretary, I don't think that's a problem. Again, I think it's critical that if it's advisory to the secretary, that before the secretary, there is that kind of professional analysis of the situation, so he or she can see, what kind of decision that has to be made. So I think that's critical. I think the recommendations that Amanda has put forward are right on. I think she's done a tremendous analysis. Again, if you need this kind of comment in writing, I think we'd be able to put that forward.
Thank you so much, Mr. Constantino. And as someone who lived in Providence for 4 years during school, I look forward to swapping restaurant recommendations with you in the near future.
If you've ever been to Federal Hill in Providence, Rhode Island, my family owns Vendor Raviolis.
Oh, fantastic! Good. I get a deal next time I go, I hear. Well, thank you so much for your comments. And no, it's not required to bring it into the committee in writing. I just wanted to give space for you all if you needed more time to look at the recommendations. Should anything change or you have anything to add prior to our March 25th meeting, I really would appreciate a letter so that we can share it with the entire committee prior to voting on the recommendations, and especially looking at the optionalities that we have.
Yeah, and I think just to comment on one thing. The other thing I know I think Amanda mentioned is there's this utilization report. I would actually add access in a utilization report, because you could have utilization high in one area. That doesn't mean that there's not an access problem as well. So I would just add that little addition to the report. So if that would be helpful.
Thank you. Yes, Representative Spiegelman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to let the committee know that unfortunately I have somebody in from out of town and I will have to leave in just a couple of minutes.
And considering that, and thank you for letting myself and the vice chair know ahead of time, are there any other comments that you would like to offer at this time so that you don't miss the opportunity?
Well, no,
there's a limited scope, Mr. Spiegelman, a limited scope. Okay, thank you. An hour and a half is, of course, a lot for everyone. And what I don't want to do is cut off conversation, though. So at this point in time, I do feel that we've had a really robust conversation. Obviously, we've had so much great material to build on as we had that conversation. And again, I echo my colleagues in thanking the staff for their diligence there. Moving forward, these recommendations are on the agenda for our March 25th meeting. So at this point in time, what I would like to do is ask if any of the committee members have any questions or comments about potential edits or changes to the recommendations you see, so that staff can take those comments and adjust if need be, only before our March 25th meeting. And Mark has started. Thank you, Mark. That's perfect. So I think, Representative Yerrick, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know where it shall lie. However, again, the certificate need process is a critical issue that if it's addressed through the restructuring and the advisory capacity, if it's I may feel more comfortable if, as a standalone item, how we may begin to make recommendations on the process. What, you know, so I don't have the answer to my question. I'm just, excuse me, asking the question or making the statement about, no, it is a question. I believe the certificate of need process should be more thoroughly identified as a process improvement on what we believe as a committee that we believe we should make.
Thank you. And I know that was part of finding number 9. And so, you know, I think I would turn it to Amanda just to say where you see that coming through in the recommendations.
Thank you. Thank you both. So I just wanted to point out, when we talk about certificate of need, CON for short, in Delaware, that process is just repackaged. It's renamed as the CPR process. So when I'm referring to CPR, Certificate of Public Review, I am talking about Delaware's CON process. And I understand that's a little bit, I just want to make that clear just for the public listening, because that is sometimes where I feel like the confusion can kind of set in when we're talking about CON and we throw around acronyms and words a lot in discussion. But under the recommendation 3, the statutory revisions, those 6 components do deal with Delaware's CON process known as the CPR process. And if it's helpful, I don't want to make any promises. I can try my very best to prepare some sort of idea on what that would look like. It wouldn't be in form of a bill draft by any means, but just a very short synopsis on kind of my ideas on, you know, I've already mentioned board composition, the suggestion to limit to 5 or 7 members. So that was one thing there. The activity subject to review, I could attempt to put together something that, you know, I'm thinking of in terms of that, because currently this board and process reviews a lot of activities. When you look out throughout the country, a lot of these CON boards operate in limited capacity, where they're only looking at nursing home bed utilization as an example. There are items that this board currently reviews, such as PET scanners. Maybe that's not something they should review. You know what I mean? Like there's just, in the earlier example about the cath lab, you know, is it really valuable for this process to have a hospital such as AI DuPont, the Children's Hospital, go through this whole process to get permission to have a cath lab? Being as they're the only children's hospital operating, you know, in that county, and I would venture to say, I believe the state. So those are some considerations that are handled under recommendation 3, and I can try my best to give you a better idea of what that will look like, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that would be. Thank you for that. Where some of the words that we've used would be transparency, professionalism, consistency. And it's not going to be, I don't think, solved in the next 7 days. However, the criteria that is a 7-step process we're not going to have, but you know, what is the decision-making process based upon objectivity, transparency, professionalism, and consistency are items that I hope through this process we can improve, again, for something that is very, very critical to Delawareans, the quality of their health care and the affordability of it.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you, Amanda. And I will echo that we won't be able to fix it in 7 days, but you know, as you both were talking about, what we perhaps can have is a kind of idea of where we would build as we build that legislation, and as Holly, if this recommendation is accepted, would start to build that legislation. And so I appreciate that. I just had one question, Amanda, really, since there were some good discussions about cost here, as far as the biannual utilization study that is the option for recommendation number 4. I might, if I missed it, I'm sorry, are there costs associated there that we should be aware of?
Thank you. Senator, I would venture to say yes, there would be a cost associated there just based on the cost, you know, as Ms. Massa mentioned earlier from the board, the Healthcare Commission, the current nursing home bed utilization report study is contracted out to an epidemiologist. So, you know, we still kind of need to discuss and figure out what a utilization study would look like and who would complete it, whether it be contracted out. Of course, the related, recommendation 4 was kind of split into two. It had an option, but I believe that setting the board up to get that information and the data through a survey would be very helpful in completing such a report dealing with utilization statistics. And that's, like I mentioned, what a lot of states are observed in doing with or without a CON process, just to help them understand where the utilization is lying in the state. So it's just one of many tools that would be used, with or without this process, whatever the committee ultimately decides. So we can certainly discuss we have the Controller General staff, Victoria here is in the meeting, DHSS as well, Health Resources Board staff. So we can kind of get a better idea of what costs or, fiscal impact would be involved in that.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any other hands raised at this point, but I'll do what the kindergarten teachers do and just wait for about 5 seconds to make sure we're not missing anyone. All right, so I do really thank all members of the committee for your attention to detail and for really interrogating the facts here and kind of working together to make sure that we are doing the next best thing for the HRB. This is the only agenda item for us today, so this is going to conclude our meeting. Our next meeting is going to be on Tuesday, March 23rd at 11 a.m. We're going to discuss updated recommendations to DIAA at that time. And so if there's no other questions or comments, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I remember to stay on.
You get brownie points.
Good morning, Chase. Are you able to, thank you.
That, all right. Thank you, Chase.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Pettyjohn, for staying on. We appreciate you.
Absolutely.
Bye,
Always
everybody.
great seeing you.
And